If you don't start writing before you even start your study, then you're doing it wrong. Or so I've heard people say who think about nothing else but writing. In this and in the following video, I want to talk about the beginner's version of my personal approach to writing a paper, mixed together with some common advice. Information for more advanced writing will come in later videos. My name is Dennis, I am a neuroscientist and freelance scholar, and this is my series on scholarship in science. If you missed out on the previous videos, you can go to the series playlist and watch them. Rest assured, I am very aware that most students have not thought about writing until the whole study was done. So, how do you start writing at this point? Well, I know from experience that beginning to write is actually hard for most people, especially if it's the first paper. And I don't think there really is one good method to get you to write. The only good advice to give you is to just start writing. So how can you prepare to write? Usually, if you've been a student for a while, you already have presented the work to a committee or in the lab meeting or in the department seminar, or you have already presented a poster about your topic. If so, you can use your notes and figures from those presentations as a starting point to construct your paper. Once you've gathered all the notes, you should look up the author guidelines of the journal that you want to publish a paper in. Now, this is a point of debate among scientists, but I personally think that having limitations actually makes it easier to write a paper in a similar way as limitations make you more creative in problem solving and finding a solution, or in similar way as having time restrictions actually forces you to put more efficient planning and scheduling into your daily work, and you may end up being more productive in fewer work hours. The author guidelines of the journal should provide you with their standard format in terms of which segments they would like to see and word counts for each segments that you should not exceed. So what do you write first? I would suggest to start with the methods. Well, actually, I recommend to start with whatever segment that you feel have the best idea of what it should look like in the finished article. But if you don't already have words in your mind that you could just throw on the screen, starting to describe the methods should be the easiest way. You already know what you've done, and the methods usually have been something you've been thinking about very thoroughly, even before you started the study. The method writing is quite rigid. There is no interpretation necessary. You really just write down what you did. If you did experiments involving animal or human subjects, you need to declare which laws and regulations applied and how you ensured that your study was according to standards of responsible research, didn't violate regulations or break any laws. And then for each experiment, you describe your subject groups. In my case, it would be the species and the strain and the amount of animals and their age and sex. Check the author guidelines and ask your advisor which information you need to provide for your particular type of study. Next would be the description of the study design and finally the details of the used methods. You finalize the methods by adding technical details, for example, which hardware and software you used, and the settings and functions you applied. I want to make one point on style in the method sections. In my opinion, passive voice is better than active voice here. There are only so many ways you can say, I did this, I did that, and then I did the other thing. It's much less of a pain to write the method section in passive voice. And here is an example from one of my own papers. So in active voice, the paragraph would say, "We amplified the received signal and filtered it with a bandpass filter. We then digitized and stored it. Finally, we separated the activity of single neurons within a recording offline. For this, we used the spike sorting function provided by Spike 2. Active voice puts an excessive emphasis on we. This happens through the repetition and because it necessarily shows up in emphasis-granting parts of a sentence. But who did the action is not the focus in the method section. We already know you did it. So using active voice moves attention away from the important information and towards redundant and irrelevant information. So now in passive voice. The received signal was amplified and bandpass filtered before it was digitized and stored. The activity of single neurons within a recording was separated offline using the spike sorting function provided by Spike 2. I think this is more to the point and really emphasizes the important parts. And since we are talking about the first draft of your paper, I'd recommend to just go with it for now. There is more to be said about how to manipulate emphasis in sentences and how to get creative with language. But that's not very important in the method section, and I will talk about it in a later video. Just one more thing, you might also notice the use of past tense, since it is not an instruction manual but a report of what was done, and this is a rule for the whole paper. Now that you have all the methods fresh in your mind and remember their limitations, you should start writing the results section. Remember why you did which experiment and find a good sequence for them to describe in the section. If you have done a preliminary study before you did the actual study, this is where you could start. For example, the preliminary study could show that the method you are applying actually does what you want it to do in your hands. Let's say you have used a new mouse model that expresses a certain fluorescent marker in a particular part of the mouse's body. In that case, you would want to start the results section by showing that your marker is indeed in the places that you needed it to be for your study. Then you show the main result of your study, and from there go on showing the different control experiments that you use to support your result. And the easiest way to begin writing up the results of each experiment is to describe the figures that you probably already have made in order to look at the data. So choose the figures that make your point most clearly, put them in the sequence that we just talked about, and then describe each figure in one paragraph. After you describe the figure, go back to the beginning of the paragraph and write down what the purpose of the experiment was that you just explained the figure for. And finally, go to the beginning of the paragraph again and formulate the main takeaway from this paragraph. So the paragraph would start with a statement of interpretation of the figure, then comes a motivation of the experiment, the description of the data, including descriptive statistics like means and standard deviations, and the results of statistical tests such as p-values, etc. Some authors like to summarize their main finding at the end of the results section, but my recommendation would be to do it at the beginning of the discussion section. The keen-eyed viewer will notice that my text actually does not follow the described structure very strictly. This has to do with decisions about text transitions from paragraph to paragraph. It may be necessary at the end of a major segment to summarize the findings at the end of the paragraph, but since we are currently just trying to get the first draft out, we don't care about that too much yet. Instead, we focus on getting everything into the document that needs to be told and nothing that doesn't need to be told. And I hope that my recommendations will help you get a good logical flow in your paper. By the way, your co-authors might not agree with the selections you are making. That also you should not care about too much when simply writing the first draft. Just be ready to make major changes once you've showed it to your co-authors. That's completely normal. Starting to write the first draft of a paper doesn't come easy to most students. I recommend beginning with the method section, which has the most restrictions and isn't a place for discussions and interpretations. I recommend writing the methods in passive voice to avoid repeating irrelevant information, which can be very hard to read. With the methods and study design fresh in your mind, you're ready to write down the results of each experiment and control experiment. My recommendation is to begin by showing that in your hands the method is working as intended, and then show the main result, and then go through the control experiments to rule out certain alternative explanations. Once you have the sequence laid out, describe each figure in its own paragraph and put your interpretation, the take-home message of the figure, and the reasons for this experiment to the front. You should then move on to the discussion and leave the introduction for last. I will share my experience and recommendations on those two parts in the next video. As always, you will find a link to the PDF with the information from this video on my website. The link is in the description, and while you are here, you can sign up to my newsletter to get a monthly update. But before you leave to my website, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up and leave questions, remarks and suggestions in the comment section. Thanks for watching, have a good day, bye bye.